Good evening and welcome to our bi-weekly webinar, Cows and Chaos. This week we are going to talk about working with cropping neighbors, salvage crop pros and cons. We've got three people that are going to be doing presenting today. Diane Westerlund with the Chinook Applied Research Association, Barry Yaremcio, a beef nutrition specialist with Alberta Agriculture, and myself, I'm Dean Dyck. I'm Farm Business Management Specialist at the Ag Info Center, and I'll also be doing the moderating. So a couple of things if you are fairly new to the this webinar business. First of all, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to pick it up later tomorrow. You'll get an email with a link to the recording. Secondly, if you want to ask questions, there is a question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Please type in your questions and we will take them at the end of everybody's presentation. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Diane, who's going to give us some information and an overview. Diane, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Dean. As Dean mentioned, I'm manager with Chinook Applied Research Association down in Oyen, the southeastern part of the province here. And I'm pleased to partner with Dean and Barry in putting this webinar together. Our goal is to help provide information and tools for a mutually beneficial link between cattlemen and our cropping neighbors. So Mother Nature, and my screen is frozen. That's not good. There we go. Mother Nature has provided a scenario with both needs and opportunities over this past several months. Following a dry year in 2018, many feed yards and a long winter feeding session, many feed yards are empty, and grazing resources are limited in some parts of the province. But there are also acres of crop that were affected by drought earlier this season and hail as well. Hay yield is still to be determined, but will likely not meet the demand, especially here in east and southern parts of the province. So in late June, this is what lots of the crops look like down here in the special areas. We did start getting some rain towards the end of June, so that turned some of the fields into a sort of a multi-green hue look, and some of these plants are not going to reach maturity probably by the time of normal harvest, and again depends on what Mother Nature delivers over the next month or so, but there's a good chance that some of these crops are going to have more value as a forage than they are grain in the bin. So what are some of those options in working with our cropping neighbors and utilizing those crops as a forage option? So one of the options is using it as grazing without any extra processing. We've almost reached the window though with a lot of those crops where we're going to end up with more waste than perfect utilization. Another option though is to swath it down and use it for swath grazing later this fall or into the winter months. Silaging, of course, is another option to preserving that as a feed source, or cutting and rolling it up in bale form for stored feed. But before we look at the economics, which Dean will be delivering in a few minutes here, there's a few questions that should be maybe considered before a decision is made regarding whether that's going to be a good forage or not. With different crops, there's different things to consider, and I'll go through a little bit more information on each of those three in a couple minutes. Also, we need to look at how much forage is actually out there. Is it worth putting resources into it to actually harvest what potential there is? Are there any issues that might come along with that crop, whether it be weeds, nitrates perhaps, or possibly even ergot? And how and when can that forage be used? Is it a grazing scenario, swath grazing, putting it into silage bales, Greenfeed bales? How is it going to be fed in bale feeders? Is it going to be rolled out or tub grind? So there's lots of options there, and when looking at that standing crop, I think some of these things should be in your mind as to what that end use is going to be. So when it comes to cereals, majority of cereals do make a pretty good forage. It does depend on what the stage they are at harvest time. Is the more grain, typically there's more fiber, possibly less protein in that particular crop. Now, if it's a mixed stages, as that picture showed earlier, you might get the benefit of sort of that vegetative growth and potentially higher protein, and then as well as a grain, so a good mix there. Nutrients in general, annual crops are a little bit lower in calcium maybe than some of the perennials like hay or alfalfa might be, and that calcium phosphorus balance is important as a consideration on how that feed might go into a ration. Grain overload is also something that should be thought about. Even a 15 or even a 10 bushel wheat crop can have a significant amount of grain if it has gone to maturity. So 15 bushels, even at an average of 16 pounds per bushel, that's 900 pounds of grain in one bale. So depending how many animals have access to that bale or how it is fed, could potentially have some overload issues. Nitrates are another concern. And also, maybe on a smaller level of concern, awns can be an issue with potential mouse sores. And there is a difference in some of the cereal varieties, whether they have rough awns or smooth awns. Stettler wheat, for example, has rough awns. CDC Maverick barley has smooth awns. There's other barleys, though, have rough awns, CDC Cowboy and Claymore. CDC Austenson is braided as a semi-smooth. So, and then the triticale varieties, typically the earlier varieties had quite a long awn in triticale and were rough awned. Some of the newer varieties, AAC Delight, Taza, and Bunker, have a shorter awn. It is still a rough awn, but much less volume to it than some of the previous varieties. And I think the thing to remember with these cereals is to get a feed test done so that you do know exactly what you are dealing with. With pulses, typically pulses make a pretty good forage and are generally, fairly high in protein and other nutrient qualities. It does depend on the stage and what maturity they're at. Lentils, one issue, if they've been impacted by drought, are they actually tall enough that you can swath and roll them up into a bale or chop it for silage? So that might be something that maybe grazing is a better option for. And again, feed testing is important to see how that fits into, how those crops might fit into your ration. Oilseeds take some further consideration. Typically, we don't recommend that oilseeds become the main component in a ration. That being said, though, they can still contribute very well into a ration with some other forage options. Mustard palatability can be an issue as it gets, particularly as it gets more and more mature, but possibly can still be worked in on a smaller level. Flax, I think, is one that probably has a stronger role as a bedding source or rather than an actual nutrient source. Again, feed testing is important, and Barry's going to look at some of the considerations with some of these crops in a little more detail here in a few minutes. One thing when you're looking at trying to establish an agreement between the cattlemen and our cropping neighbors is to figure out how much actual forage material is out there. Some of these crops started out very, very thin. They filled in, possibly even with some weed material. But in order to get a good handle on how much is out there, first, an option to just getting out there with a swather and making around and rolling it up to no number of bales. You can do a hand clip of either a square meter or square yard areas, allow that to dry, and then convert that to pounds of dry matter per acre. So if the area you're clipping is a square meter, once that material has dried down, multiplying by 4,047 gives you pounds per acre. If you're still in imperial measurements, a square yard, 4,840 will give you pounds per acre. And ideally, you want to do these clips in several areas of the field so that you have a representative sample and yield estimate for the entire field. Some other considerations are the weeds. Because some of the crops, whether they were hailed or affected by drought, there wasn't an opportunity to do timely weed control. So be careful about what weeds you might be bringing back with that feed. It's a good idea to know what's out there and what the maturity stage of those weeds are, and how is that forage being utilized. If it's put into a silage pit or silage bales, perhaps some of those weed seeds are going to be ensiled and not be viable seeds. But if it's a mature crop that's baled up, chances are those weeds are mature as well, and you're bringing some of that material home with you. And that could even be herbicide tolerant kochia, which is very common down in this part of the province, and that might be something you don't necessarily want to introduce into your operation. Where you plan to feed that material or that forage is another consideration with respect to weeds. Weeds are easier to control in a cultivation scenario versus hayland or native pasture. So just a few things to keep in mind. We mentioned nitrates as a potential problem. Stressed cereal crops can accumulate nitrates. Typically, this happens where the soil has higher levels of nitrogen, whether that be through fertilizer or maybe that was a winter feeding area. So there was lots of urine and manure spread over that area to give the soil a higher available nitrogen, can contribute to that nitrate potential. If a feed source does have some nitrates, so you can typically manage it in a ration by mixing off with other feeds. So I think nitrates are something that can be managed. The important thing though is to feed test to understand exactly what you are dealing with. Ergots, on the other hand, I think are a little harder to handle. The alkaloids from those spores can cause abortion, can restrict blood flow to extremities. So there's been some very sad cases of ergot poisoning where animals actually lose their hoof wall, their ears, tails. So something to be aware of. And my thoughts are avoid it if at all possible. But again, feed testing will help determine what your levels are. And scouting that field prior to harvesting is a good idea. I'm just going to touch a little bit on economics. If grazing is the option for utilizing potential forage, typically base the economics on animal units, which is how many cows or cow-calf pairs will be out in that grazing scenario. Summer grazing rates tend to range quite dramatically. You know, some people are paying 75 cents per head or per pair per day, and others the rate is, you know, up well over $1 up to $1.50 and possibly even higher depending on the location and the forage that's available. Of course, final payment depends on how long those animal units are out in that forage and who's responsible for water fences, checking those cattle. One of the pluses, it does provide some opportunities in nutrient distribution versus leaving a crop standing. So there's options there. Would encourage people to enter into some sort of a formal agreement, you know, if you are looking at grazing. Dean's going to look at much more detail on the silage and greenfeed economics, so I'm going to leave that for him. He's got some really good examples on how to value that potential that salvage crop as either both the silage and greenfeed. So decisions on that that connection or that link between those salvage crops and the cattleman's need for a forage. So we've talked about different potential uses, what stage is that crop at, the volume, weed content, what equipment is available to you. Are you relying on custom operators, and the location of that forage relative to where you want to use it. And of course the economics are important, and it should make both sense and sense to both sides of the agreement. And on the agreement side, I'm just going to touch briefly on, I feel it's, you know, having a written agreement can really save potential problems down the road. And it doesn't matter if this is something between friends, between families, neighbors, or a stranger miles away. Having that written agreement can prevent a lot of bad assumptions and maintain future relations in a much more positive way. So some basic points that should be included in a written agreement is just the details of the landowner manager, the tenant, and the contact information, where the location of this forage is, what acres are involved, and what type of crop is there. And then the land use, how is it going to be used, whether it's grazing, and if it's used for grazing, who is responsible for checking fences or even fixing the fence to make sure that it's going to hold the cattle there, who brings the salt out, monitoring the water, who gets called when the cows get out, and sort of the general liability of those. And I'm sure there's other considerations as well. If it's a silage situation, maybe there needs to be some guidelines on the timing of that, access to the field, same with cutting and baling, and maybe dates for that for those bales to be removed from the field so that the owner or manager can proceed with some of the fall management practices that he was planning to do. And then there's the what ifs. What if the custom silage team doesn't show up till the crop is too mature to silage? How does that affect that agreement? What if it rains and rains and rains and you can't get back into that field? Or if you're leaving deep ruts that cause the landowner some additional grief before he can make that field into a decent seed bed for the next crop? Or the custom haulers don't show up, so those bales are sitting there. It's well into October and November, and you're causing potential issues there. So those things should be considered when that agreement is made up front. And also just the terms. If you're grazing, the dates in and out, when harvest potentially can be completed, and what are the terms of money exchange? Is it based on animal units, the days of grazing? If it's a silage situation, is it wet or dry weight? Does feed quality factor into that equation? Same with bales. Is it per bale? Is it done on a crop share? Is it based on bale weight, number of bales? How are you going to weigh those bales? Who's counting them? Does feed quality come into that scenario? And then what are the actual dates? Is payment expected up front? Is it okay to wait till after harvest or till the calves are sold in the fall? Just having that information written down just can cause or save a lot of stress down the road. And of course, it should be signed and ideally having someone witness it as well. So that kind of wraps up my portion of the presentation. I just wanted to mention that there are a number of applied research and forage associations in the province that all have access to information on varieties, forage yield, utilization, can help with ration development. We can provide a lot of information, and we're also a link to some of the specialists like Barry and Dean, and can link you up with their expertise as well. And other resources, the Ag Info Center, 310 Farm, it has all kinds of specialists that you have access to there. BCRC website has a lot of information from a number of years and a number of research projects. Saskatchewan Ag Center as well. The Alberta Ag website is sort of in a developmental stage right now, so some of the access to information there is sort of in work in progress to get back into that, but hopefully eventually that will become available. And then on the health side of things and safety, there's a few other contacts there as well if there's any issues that require attention there. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dean.
Good, thanks, Diane. Excellent overview and presentation. So my part is I get to cover the wonderful world of economics of salvage crops. So we're going to, with this, we're going to talk about salvage. We're not going to talk about hay or anything like that. We're going to talk about the salvage and some general guidelines. So what we're going to cover here, we're going to talk about valuing a standing salvage crop, so for silage or green feed. And then just to give you some idea on custom rates, we get a lot of calls at the Ag Info Center about custom rates. So round bale, silage, pit silage, and green feed, and some of the ones that are fairly new, especially when it comes to round bale silage. So the basics of valuing a standing salvage crop for silage. Generally, when you're looking at silage pricing, a typical way of doing it is pricing it is 12 times the price of barley. That's a pretty standard guideline that's been used over a number of years. The only thing with the 12 times the price of barley is that this is for excellent quality silage. So it's top notch. And we're going to talk about a little bit about quality as we go on here. So if you take a look at what the current average barley price in the province is, it's $5.50 a bushel. So, and then that can vary depending on location. If you're going to do this type of calculation, use the barley price that's in your area. So pit price, simply 12 times $5.50 a bushel, $66 per wet ton. That's 35% dry matter. So if the dry matter counts, if it's a different dry matter, then that number will change. So with salvage crops, it's important to use a discount for potential quality issues. And I'm using 20%. That's a general ballpark number. So Barry's going to talk about this later, is, the quality is important. So if it varies down by 20%, and that's just a number that you can use, that brings that price down to $52.80 a wet ton. So quality does make a difference, and Barry's going to talk about that and show you how you can look at the price from a quality standpoint in his presentation. If you want to do standing silage, so before we talked about in the pit, so standing silage, general rule of thumb, 8 times the price of barley. Okay. So, and again, like I said, this is for a really good quality silage standing. And so at $5.50 a bushel, that puts that at $44 a wet ton, 35% dry matter. So again, if you're looking at a salvage crop from your neighbors, use a discount for potential quality issues. Probably the best thing to do is to get a feed test. And like Diane said, that's the basics of this. So I'm using as an estimate, take off 20%. That brings that down to $35.20 a wet ton. So quality makes a difference. So start at 8 times and work your way. So another factor that plays into this is the actual number or the yield, of the actual silage that comes off. So there's a difference, and it's when you talk about backing it off from the pit and how many tons you get off, then that makes a difference in the final price. So if you look at 4 wet tons per acre here, and the pit price at 66, which we calculated at 12 times. If it's 4 tons an acre, it's probably going to cost about $17.50 a wet ton to chop, haul, and pack. That brings us back to $48.50 standing price. Let's discount for quality. So now we're back to $38.80. The difference at 5 tons is that you can see here that the chop, haul, and pack is less. It's $16.10, bringing that back to $49.90. Take off a quality discount. So we're now really, really close to $40 a wet ton, and that's at 5 tons. So you can see the difference between the two here. And it's because of the lower cost to chop, haul, and pack. Now, the other way to do it, and of course, being an economist, I have to show you multiple ways of doing this. The other way of doing it, and this is strictly on if you're a landowner and you're going to sell it, you could do this based on potential revenue. So looking at this, you could go, okay, potentially, if it's a barley crop, it could have yielded 80 bushels an acre. Potential price would have been $5.50, so the gross revenue is $4.40. You have to take off harvesting costs because that's not incurred anymore, so you take that back. The net value of the barley, therefore, is about $369 an acre. So now you have to know the silage yield. So this is kind of a wild card. I'm assuming 0.08 ton of silage per bushel of grain. It's kind of a rough guideline, but if you know it, it's a little bit of a wild card. So that values standing barley at 57.65 a wet ton. Take off quality, now you're down to 46. And again, we're talking salvage crop. So it's a different way of doing it, and it just kind of gives you a range that people would look at. This gives you an idea of a low, average, and high yield. So let's say it's potential barley yield of 50, yielding 4 tons an acre. If we take off, if we calculate the standing silage, the value is $40. And as a tip, as you would expect, the value would go up as the yield goes up. Okay, so 40, 46, 47. So the comparisons. So if we look at it and say, okay, let's use standard 8 times price of barley at 4 wet tons an acre, we're looking at $35.20. Backing it off from the pit, $38.80, and then the potential revenue method gives us a little over $40. All these prices have been discounted for potential quality issues. So why the differences in price? Well, the last method, the potential revenue method here, it doesn't factor the cost of getting it into the pit. It's basically the maximum price that a landowner would expect if he's giving you the actual silage. 8 times the price of barley is a guideline. It's strictly a historical rule of thumb. And so finally, backing off from the pit here is probably your most effective strategy because it takes account of the actual cost of putting it into the pit. So let's talk about Greenfeed. Okay. So you can use silage pricing to back off and calculate out Greenfeed. All you have to do is because you're dealing in a different dry matter percentage, you just convert the dry matter. So if the pit price is $66 a wet ton, 12 times the price of barley. So when you do the conversion on Greenfeed at 85% dry matter, that puts the Greenfeed price at 8 cents a pound or $112 a bale on a 1,400 pound bale. Again, we're talking about the best quality Greenfeed. So again, as we if we have to back, so we'll back it off to get it into the yard, right? So let's say it's 1.5 tons an acre, Greenfeed price 112, to cut bale and haul about $35 a bale. So that gives you a standing price of $77 a bale, per pound 5.5 cents. Now adjusting for quality, this could be around 4 cents a pound. Okay, so quality feed test makes a difference. Right. If it's, now you can see the difference here again, higher volume, higher yield. And that means that it's a lower cost to cut bale and haul because it's the economies of scale. So the standing price is now 80, standing price is 5.7 cents a pound. Now you're at 4.5 with a quality discount. And this is all assuming a 1,400 pound bale. So another method, and I use this, but it's a simple rule of thumb, value the Greenfeed at 80% of the price of standing hay. Right? So right now, if you were to ballpark what the provincial price range for hay now is 6 to 8 cents a pound landed in the yard. An average cost, again, average, cut bale and haul about 2 cents a pound. So this puts your standing hay price at around 4 to 6 cents. Greenfeed prices would be at a range of about 3 to 5 cents a pound, putting it at $42 to $70 a 1,400 pound bale. Now this is guideline only. It's not looking at the actual feed value of the salvage crop. So they kind of work out to the same at 1.5 tons an acre. Yeah, if we do silage pricing, we're backing it off 4 cents. If we use 80% of the price of first cut hay, it's 3 to 5 cents. So converting from the silage does take into account the cut, bale, and haul costs. So that's, it's probably your most effective strategy. But I mean, if you got a range, you can do some negotiation. One thing is that to compare is, well, what if I look at buying standing barley for Greenfeed versus purchasing hay? So this is a simple partial budget. And just to a little bit of review, all it is disadvantages versus advantages. So if you're buying standing barley, you got to buy the crop, you got to swath, bale, haul, put it up. Okay, $91 a bale, right? But you're not buying hay and you're not hauling it. Okay, so in this scenario where we priced it out based on what I've given you before, it's advantageous to purchase barley or purchase standing barley for Greenfeed versus purchasing hay at current hay prices. So quick review of hay and silage equipment costs, because we get a lot of calls, honestly, at the Ag Info Center talking about custom rates. So just review, And I won't go through this too quickly because people, they'll want to probably write this down a little bit. So mower conditioners, probably $20 to $22 an acre. These are the survey rates, and so you can adjust accordingly. Raking, about $8 to $10 an acre. Large round bales, put them up $14 to $15 a bale. That's twine. If you're going to put net wrap on, add another $1 a bale. Hauling, you're looking at about $12 to $13 a bale for a standard 17 bale load. So if you do about 2 bales an acre, that's about $42 to $45 a bale. For silage, swathing's about $1 to $1.50 a ton. To chop, $4.50 to $5.50 a ton. We're talking short tons, not metric. Hauling about $2.50. Packing about $1.40 to $2 a ton. So right into the pit, $9.40 to $11.50 per ton average cost. So like I showed you before, with silage, it's all yield dependent. And if it's a larger yield, then economies of scale will kick in and they'll be lower cost. We get quite a number of an increase in questions about silage bale wrapping. So these are the custom rates that you can find on the website. Swathing at about $15 an acre, baling again 14 to 15, net wrap of about $1 to wrap them, around $5 to $10 a bale. So if you're looking at a 2,000 pound bale, total in the wrap is about $23.75 to $28.75 a bale. For silage bagging, if you're bagging and the bag's included, if the customer needs to provide the tractor, it's about $6.75 per metric ton. And chop haul bag included, and if you might need to provide the tractor, that's probably working out to $16.50 to $17.50 a ton. So these are the survey rates. So for a lot of these, we have a farm machinery cost calculator on our website that you can go in, plug in your own values, and plug in your own machinery and figure out your own custom rate. These are guidelines. These are survey of custom operators. So just, you take these accordingly. So that's my part of the presentation. Kind of, there's a lot of numbers. So I guess the essence is that, work your own, use what I've given you as a guideline, work your own numbers. You can always call us at the Ag Info Center. We can kind of work through these things as well with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Barry, and he's going to talk about the feed portion of it. So, Barry.
All right, thanks, Dean. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Before we get going, Dean, I looked at the last slide of my presentation and there's a glitch with the feed value calculator. Can you do that in the background and have it ready for when I need it off of the BCRC website?
Yep, no problem.
Okay, thanks. So Diane gave you a good background on what you have to look at when you're trying to use a salvage crop. What's good, what's bad, and what's ugly. It can be because of drought, it can be because of hail, and unfortunately in this type of a situation in central Alberta, where it's been raining almost every second or third day for the last month, and some accumulations up to 14, 15 inches of rain, some of that hay has been turned 3, 4, and 5 times, and I'm thinking that should be considered salvage crop as well. One thing that hasn't been touched on it yet is if you're working with a neighbor who has crop insurance, there's certain things that need to be considered before going in there and actually taking the tractor and chopping the silage or making the round bales of hay. So I've got a few slides on what the regulations or what the recommendations are from AFSC. What are some of the concerns during the harvesting process? There's a calculator that Dean will have ready for me when I need it. And instead of just using theoretical values, I'm going to show how it can be used to use actual feed test results to value the crop compared to the prices of barley and canola. Barley being used for the energy, canola meal being used for the protein content. How do the salvage materials fit into a feeding program? That's going to be more of a discussion, and we'll go from there. So with AFSC, they do have the requirements for what you have to do before crops can be cut for salvage, or if you've got insurance, what needs to be done after a hailstorm. So the best thing you can do is talk to your local AFSC office to discuss your intentions. What do you need to do prior to going into the field and actually doing the work? And unfortunately, there's no one set rule. It all depends on what you're going to do and how you're going to use the crop, along with what type of insurance do you have covered by the company. So with hay production insurance, it's always related back to dry hay production. If you're, instead of using it for dry hay production, and in the areas where they are getting the moisture, there are an awful lot of bales, round bales of silage, crops being cut for chop silage into pits or into bags. If the fields are too wet, they're grazing the areas, you must contact AFSC before proceeding. They'll discuss your options and see where you can go from there. With hail insurance, if you're salvaging a crop after having a hailstorm, the report must be filed within 14 days of the storm. There's different requirements for check strips. I'm not going to even try to discuss what is needed for the different types of crops, but basically talk to the AFSC offices or an adjuster and see what you need to do before you can actually go in there and start cutting it for Greenfeed. The nice thing with that is if you can get a clearance to use check strips, instead of waiting for an extra 3 weeks or a month until an adjuster comes in and gets you an evaluation of the field, by then the quality of the forage has gone down, a lot of it's dried up, you've lost quality, you've lost yield. Using the check strip method, you can cut it when it should be cut so that you do get the best results from your efforts. Lack of moisture insurance for annual crops, silage, or green feed. You must submit a claim to AFSC if hail coverage is present. Proceed to harvest after the instructions are obtained. Otherwise, no other discussion is required because the claim is based on rainfall at a specified weather station over a period of time. So it's just making sure your bases are covered. And then crop production insurance, if you're looking at yields, again, file a claim 3 to 5 days prior to starting salvaging. And again, you're going to need some check strips, and that's something that you're going to have to discuss with them. Now, with you going in and cutting a crop that is either very short or has been damaged by hail, the tendency is you want to get as much as you possibly can off that field. You want to shave it, keep things going so that you can maximize the number of bales or pounds of feed that you're going to be getting off that field. But there's a couple things to consider. One is if you cut close to the ground, or if you're using peas, or if you're cutting peas or you're using lifters, you can get a certain amount of dirt into that windrow, and dirt contains actinomyces, which in turn, if the moisture levels are a little bit high and things are baled a little bit too soon, you can get a bunch of white mold formation. Now, white mold itself is not a big concern. It's a nuisance. There's no toxins to it, but all it's going to do is reduce the overall quality of your feed. And when the cows find areas of white mold, they're just going to eat their way around it and leave it behind. If you're also cutting crops that are cutting crops close to the ground and not leaving 3 or 4 inches of stubble as you typically would with a normal silage crop, the lowest parts of the stem are usually the poorest quality. High fiber, low protein, especially high levels of NDF. Now, NDF contains hemicellulose, which is a fiber component that is very difficult for the animals to digest. And if you look at a crop and see that it is standing very, very well, you probably have fairly high levels of hemicellulose. That's the glue that sits between the building blocks or the cells of the plant wall to keep it upright so it doesn't lodge. So your higher standability crops, wheat, triticale, compared to oats, usually has more NDF in it, reduces feed intake, reduces the quality of the crop overall. Now, the other thing that you need to be watching for is when you're actually going ahead and looking at running a baler or running a silage chopper over those fields, you've got ruts, you've got an uneven surface. If the pickup on the forage cutter or on the baler is throwing dirt into that windrow, again, you can get contamination and white mold forming in the bales or in the silage pit. Nitrate is another thing to be considered with both hailstorm or for crops that are fertilized very well in the spring with the hope of harvesting it as a cereal crop or an oilseed crop and combining for the bin. But if you've got lack of moisture like Diane showed in some of those slides right off the start, you're going to have troubles using up all the nitrogen fertilizer that is available in the crop in a normal period of time. It's gonna be going ahead and lingering in the field longer than normal. So nitrate accumulations can peak 4 to 5 days after a hailstorm or a light frost. Now that's for the annual crops. If you're looking at a legume such as alfalfa or clover or sandfoin, those crops are legumes and they hold a lot of nitrogen in the root zone and only release what's needed into the plant every day. So with the legumes, there's generally no chance or minimal chance of having a nitrate accumulation in that type of crop. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit early in the year, but we have seen killing frosts as early as the 2nd of August. That goes back many years. But with a killing frost, the roots cannot move nutrients up and down the stem. The plants are basically dead, and after a killing frost, you don't have a problem with nitrate accumulation. The light frost or a hailstorm, the roots still send up nutrients as quick as they can to keep up the plant growing quickly, but it doesn't realize that the leaves are not able to convert the nitrogen to protein, and therefore you get the accumulation. If the crop starts to regrow and you can see signs that it's trying to push out new tillers or sending out new flowers or new leaves, after 10 to 14 days, those nitrate levels should return back to normal. The highest nitrate levels are found in the bottom 3 to 4 inches of the stem. Again, another good reason to leave some of that material behind. And the best thing you can do if you're making silage or round bale silage or pit silage is when you're bringing the bales into the yard, use a core sampling tool to check the bales before they go into plastic, or if you want to do it after the plastic has been in place. You need roughly 20 samples, core samples, to be effective. So you cut a hole in the plastic, take your core sample, and then reseal the bag with the good tape that they can sell you. On a silage crop, what I suggest there for chop silage is put a 20-liter pail out beside the pit and keep a cover on it. Every second, third load that comes in, take a small handful, throw it into the pail, keep it covered, keep it sealed so you don't have it dehydrate. And then at the end of the day, or at the end of the filling of the pit from one field, mix the material up, take out about half a bread bag full of material, squeeze the air out of it, freeze it, and then send it off to a lab on a Monday or a Tuesday so it gets there during the week and it doesn't sit in a hot van or a storage facility over the weekend. Now, the next slide is where I'm going to need Dean's help. It's with this feed value calculator. Do you have something there for me, Dean?
Yes, I do. Just give me a second here. We're going to bring it up. And
we had this organized this afternoon. Everything was good, and then all of a sudden the hot link disappeared on me. So
yeah, of course it would. Okay, so there we go. And I'm assuming that's correct, right?
You're going to take the screen away from me, or set your screen up.
I already did. And then just hang on. I'm going to give you keyboard and mouse control. Okay, so go ahead.
So all I've got here is the last slide. Do I kill my presentation?
Yeah, kill it. Yep.
Okay. All right.
So you should see the screen on.
There we are.
The go-to. Yep. And you should be able to go in there and play around.
Okay. Now I just want to get this up to size. Now, this is a tool that the the Beef Forage Center of Excellence, along with BCRC, Alberta Beef Producers, put together as a tool to evaluate the value or the price of what feeds should be set at. So Diane gave you a good estimate. Okay, you've got so many pounds per acre. Dean gave you the calculation cost, but the biggest factor in all of this is trying to determine what your fair value is for that crop. So for example, I looked up this morning, the price of feed barley in the province as reported on the Alberta Ag website is $270 a ton. So we can change that price to what you need. Our dry matter content of barley grain is roughly 86%. TDN at 83% is good, and crude protein at 12.5. So I can live with those numbers. Now this is a real interesting point. If you have to pay that much for canola meal, boy, your canola prices will be great. But realistically, again, the price this morning on the website was $310 a ton. Dry matter content of 90%. That one didn't take, so we'll retry that one. 86. And 70% TDN, 39% protein. So I'm good with that. Now, if we go ahead and look at corn and some of these other feeds, I'm going to enter barley silage. Oops. So the asking price for that one, let's assume that we're using Dean's number of $60 a ton. 35% dry matter. Sorry, this is taking a little bit of time. TDN should be around 62% for a good quality silage, and I'm going to use 12% for my protein value. So you can see that on the nutrient value as a percent per ton, I'm going to bring this up to make it easier to see. They are saying that the nutrient value of what you're getting out of the feed is roughly $84 a ton as fed. So that's our benchmark. Now, if we go ahead and enter a second feed here with light hail, then we'll go to moderate hail. Come on here. Sorry, folks. We know as the price, the quality of that damage goes up, your dry matter content should be able to be kept at the same percentage points. But if we go ahead and assume that we're going to have a 10 and 20% reduction in energy and protein content. So we'll bring that value down to 58 for the first one for TDN, and then 52% for energy on the stuff that's really been hammered. Protein content, 12%, that'll bring that down to 9.6. Just give me 2 seconds here. Is my math correct there, Dean? 2.4, 12 minus 2.4, yeah, 9.6.
Yep.
And then if we're really discounting that protein content, we can go down to, let's call it 8%. You're going to be losing a lot of leaves in that material. And come on. You can see that this is fairly normal for what you would see with hail damage. So let's assume that, how do we make the value of that feed to be roughly the same as what the barley silage is? How much of a discount do we have to apply? So just playing with the numbers, I'm going to just go ahead and try $50 a ton. You can see that your value has come up a little bit, and then you go down to the moderate hail and you go with a $45 a ton price. Excuse me. And you can see that you're even at those discounted prices, the nutrient value of what you're getting from that ton of feed is going down. Your ratio or your impact on feed costs, you want to keep those as much as you possibly can to be same between the 3 different feeds. And you can see that the 60 and $50 for the light hail is looking pretty reasonable as a discount price, but you can see that the really low quality stuff, the stuff that's really been hammered off, is even at $35 a ton is not worth that much. So with this type of a calculator, it takes a little bit of practice to use it, but it can really show you what is the fair market nutrient value of that price. It's not by economics as far as how Dean showed it or the estimate that Diane used, but you have to have the cooperation of the producer that you're buying the crop from or selling to. You need to get a feed test result, get the results back, and then work it through the calculator to see what contribution that is actually making towards your ration on a nutrient value rather than pounds or tons. A couple points I want to make with what Diane was talking about, using flax straw for bedding. You've got to be careful. If there is any green straw in the flax, what you've baled up from the flax field, green flax straw can contain prussic acid, which contains hydrogen cyanide. So basically, if they start eating that green straw, you could have a bunch of dead cows on your hands in a very, very quick period of time. With the canola, a hailstorm, or I'm seeing a lot of crops right now in the full flower stage, they're going to take roughly 6 weeks to be ready to swath. So if we don't have a frost and the weather smartens up, you could probably see some mature crops by the 15th of September. But the concern with the canola, if you're taking it for feed, good quality stuff, you need to test for nitrates and you need to test for sulfur in addition to what you normally do. And for those that have never fed silage before, if you're using chopped silage and you're feeding 35% dry matter, you need 2.5 pounds of silage to replace 1 pound of hay or 1 pound of green feed. There's a calculator where you can put in the moisture content and see what the conversion factor is for if you're doing bale silage at 40% moisture or down to 28 or 30. So there's ways to check on how many pounds are you going to need compared to what you typically did with hay. So Don't know what else to say from this side. Dean, are there any questions that have come in for any of us over the period of the presentation?
Actually, one question that we've had is, are we able to print this presentation off? And I'm probably thinking that we could get this presentation out. We can email it out, I would think.
Yep.
Yeah, Diane, you can chime in there if you're okay with that. Oh,
Sorry, I was mute. Yes, yeah, I'd be fine with that.
Okay, we can make it available to the attendees. Yep, no problem.
And probably, with it being available on the Roping the Web Agriculture YouTubes, the presentation will be there, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the Forage Association wants to have these on their websites as well. That's probably another way we can distribute the information.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good reminder, Barry, that all of these series are recorded, but they will be posted on the YouTube channel, and all you have to look for is the Cows and Chaos video playlist on our website, or on the YouTube channel. So I don't see any other questions. So coming through, any other final comments? I will bring up, just give me a second. I'm going to bring up since you were talking about this feed value calculator, I am going to bring up, just give me a second here. I'll bring up that website so people can look at it. Just give me a sec. Yeah. So it's online as well as downloadable. So it's beefresearch.ca. Look for /research/feedvalueestimator.cfm. That's the website, and the download is right there.
If you want to just type it in, I can usually find it if I go BCRC feed value calculator, and it'll bring up this description on the search.
Yep, good. Okay, we put a lot of time. This one is we have a lot of time. We spent a lot of time, a lot of information. So I don't see any more questions.
If people want to chat to us at the Ag Info Center, the toll-free number is 310-3276 or 310-FARM.
And there's the other from out of province is also the Saskatchewan Agriculture Ag Knowledge Center as well. So, and the last thing then on the question box is thank you. That was great and timely info. So thank you very much. And so with that, I think we will close it off for the evening. And like I said, you'll receive a link to the video, or sorry, to the recording of this webinar. That email should be in your inbox tomorrow morning, or tomorrow sometime. So with that, I thank Barry and Diane for some excellent presentations, and we will close off the webinar for the evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dean.